You now have to ask yourself, do you want high effort, quickness, and a lack of awareness, or do you want a little bit slower, better anchor, better awareness, no, and lower average effort?
Well, that's a great question, because it's like, on the one hand, you could look at the average effort guy and say, well, at least I know he's going to be where I need him to be most of the time, and other players can help me out. But I'm thinking, well, then I'm just picking a guy that I'm going to replace um, the first chance that I get. Where on that end, you could say, well, that might be the most efficient thing, because if you know that this guy's just a rental for you, if you know, then you don't have any preconceived notions. And if he starts to get it in some way, you're probably thinking, well, he's still not athletic enough for me to really like that. So I can see the kind of, I can see that kind of thought process where you go, well, if we need him, we can put him in here. But if not, he'll hang around a year maybe with our team until we find somebody else better to replace him. So I can kind of dig that understanding if that's really how you're looking at it and being pragmatic. But the emotional side of me goes, why not? I'd rather take a chance on the athletic talent who
Mm-hmm.
who might develop into something who actually is much better than what we're seeing on the field right here.
And then you have to ask yourself, what does your team need, or where are you trying to get better at on your defense? Are you looking for more speed up front? Are you looking for that? Surrounding yourself with 11 guys of giving high effort. Um, do you need a three technique or a one technique? Because if you need a one technique, you're probably going to want to lean towards what's his name?
Adolphus.
Adolphus Washington.
Yes.
But if you want a three technique, it looks like the how do you say him?
Nikum Diche, I think.
Nikum Diche. That's probably your best bet for the three technique at this point, because there's not a lot of separation between the two of them, although they have their different strengths and weaknesses. As, looking at them as a prospect as a whole, it's sort of a tight race.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Not a lot of separation.
No.
Then it becomes what's your flavor and your preference,
Yeah, and it's just, I just don't see, like, when I look at Adolphus Washington, I don't see a future with him. I see the near present, and maybe if I had to, like, oh, I guess so. Whereas with Nikum Diche, I see, yeah, possibly. And neither of those are fun evaluations. Neither of these are like, we left this and going, wow, this was great, but it's still instructive. I'm not running out to go, oh my gosh, you've got to see these two players, but I really did leave this thinking. I love the questions you asked, which is, who would you pick and why, and what do you have to think about and consider when evaluating players of this type? And
I'm gonna say, like, what you got with Washington in terms of a very reasonable ceiling is you get God, who's his name? Michael Brockers for the Rams. You get that kind of a high ceiling. He's because I watched him a lot when he was at LSU, and there's a lot of similarities between these two guys. I'd say Brockers is probably a little bit better an athlete, but effort is very similar. It's a hit and miss, sort of average effort kind of thing. You got plays where you're like, okay, bare minimum. You don't have a penetrator. You don't have a guy who's completely lost. You don't have a guy who's closing in on that ball, constantly finding his way to the ball routinely. But at the same time, he's navigating his way there, playing his role in a very typical way, but he has the physical skills to achieve it. And he's not dominant either. But at the same time, you know, the NFL seemed to be higher on Brockers than I ever was. So that could easily happen here. But just for me personally, I'm on your I'm seeing the similar thing to what you're saying in terms of his future. And I'm giving him a ceiling sort of Brockers.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much you want to invest with that.
Yeah, and I get that. And it's like, this is the other thing that happens with the NFL, and it's a discussion that I would say that is very akin to something that I had with my wife this evening at dinner, which was, you know, we were talking about corporate America and about how businesses sometimes can succeed in spite of themselves, and they can have a bit of arrogance about them when they have that success because maybe they don't have a lot of competition. You know, maybe they, you know, they're, you know, and the NFL definitely fits that, as there are times where they succeed in spite of themselves. And if you're able to throw money around in certain ways that you don't, you wouldn't have to be cost conscious because, you know, if there was an AFL again, you know, and it was the NFL versus the AFL, maybe the NFL would have to be more cost conscious and better at picking their players and get guys that are really going to have a bigger impact early on and be putting more forethought into it. But if the equivalent of picking a guy like, you know, like you said, Brockers or Washington in this case, is kind of like a company going, well, you know, we've got the money to spend, so let's never give anybody anything worse than a medium-sized compact car whenever we rent out cars on trips, and let's plan trips for business meetings that we could accomplish over the phone, but we'll send people on these trips, you know, every month that rings up thousands or millions of dollars for them in expenses because we can, you know. I almost get that same sense of feeling of how teams would pick players, and with that same kind of like almost underlying arrogance that we don't have to be that conscious about it all.
And I would say a lot of what that is the NFL is madly in love. Talent evaluators within the NFL, coaches and whatnot, they're madly in love with the things that they can see in that stuff. Physical athleticism, strength, power, heavy-handedness, these types of things. It takes up such a large amount of the focus and priority of what they're looking for. And that's why, like, I could see the NFL valuing both of these prospects probably more than you and I are going to tape.
Yeah.
And you know, we've only watched one game. Maybe there's some other game out there doing some much. We watched Alabama. So if we're watching guys who are just holding their own and doing decent and not getting embarrassed against Alabama's front, you know, there's something to be said about that onto itself. But we didn't see any dominating. And you brought up Quantaris Smith as a guy who did dominate against guys who are thriving in the NFL right now. Fluker's been a very good addition for the Chargers, and Smith tore him up. But, you know, he's not in the NFL right now because his knee never got healthy. He's got damage, and he couldn't even pass the physical, so the Broncos had to let him go. So sometimes, you know, that happens, and a guy who has talent that I was so excited about just doesn't make it because of injury. And I gave him the lowest injury grade I could, but you know, you just can't project those things.
But that's the point. You identified a good player who was a small school player who played extremely well against big name NFL players now, and we didn't see anything remotely that would be on the same plane as what Smith was able to do, you know, from guys who, you know, from these guys here. And I guess to me, it's just like, if this is what we're going to see, if this is what we're going to see from them consistently, and we don't know yet, but if it were that way, no, I wouldn't want to pick either of them. I mean, I know that may be bold. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, you know, everyone else is going to want them, you know, but I think the point is if you agree with us that the NFL isn't as choosy as they need to be about things, or that it's very easy to grade on tangible qualities, and the most tangible qualities are our physical skill, and they haven't figured out how to define or refine their evaluation processes to look at things in a consistent way to show effort, to show conceptual savvy, to show when a guy is hiding his, just trying to stay on the field because he knows he's going to get in trouble if he doesn't. Things that are just like maybe seem more subjective, but if you're really looking closely, you should be able to figure out a way to define that. Then I think that if you're looking at those types of things, you could look at these players and say there's potential there to help you, but it's very short term. Or with one, and with the other, he's a much more of a long-term project who, if you don't see him getting it right away, Nikomdiche, within a year or two, you might be cutting bait fairly quick.
Yeah. And I played a lot next to Brandon Mebane at Cal, and I got a lot of exposure to various different forms of defensive tackles in the NFL, in college. Both of the guys inside of me are still playing in the NFL. Lorenzo Alexander and Brandon Mebane. And Mebane was an athletic guy who was very raw, but you could just see, good functional strength and power. And he wasn't like making plays all over the field in college. He just wasn't. And I don't know, do you think he's making plays all over the field for the Seahawks? But people really seem to like Brandon Mebane and see him as a major asset. They see one of the better defensive tackles. I don't know.
Who was the guy for the Falcons for a while? I think it was Robert Geathers, who was a defensive tackle who could just plow people into the backfield for a while, like really strong, could do the whole bulldozer, bull rush type of thing. But that was really the only thing about his game that he could do, but he was was Jumpy Geathers. Was it Jumpy Geathers, or am I thinking of the wrong?
How far back are we going?
I don't past 3 to 5 years was when he still was with the Falcons. Maybe it was 5 years ago.
I know Babineau was in there.
Babineau. It was Jonathan Babineau.
Okay.
Babineau. I wasn't thinking Gather. I was thinking the wrong guy. Jumpy Gathers was a Washington Redskin.
And he was an undersized guy but he was really good at the better pass rush defensive tackles in the NFL.
Yeah, and he could bench press you. I mean, it was that was what I remember thinking about was what he was able to do. He had strength. He could use his strength and leverage very well. But I just wondered about him. But well, again, we ended up with more questions than answers with this particular version of the RSP program.
I got more answers.
Okay.
And my answers are, I think you did too. You said them.
Yeah, that's true.
We know a lot more about these two guys than we did. And if somebody, oh man, dude, there's this guy for Ohio State. He's amazing. Adolphus Washington. And gets him at the 10th overall pick. I'm gonna go, wow. What are you expecting from that? From that kind of value, you're just gonna get.
True.
You're gonna get not a guy who's closer to the mean, than someone who's special in any way that we've seen or noticed in our one game sample size.
Yeah, and with Nikomdiche, it's the same thing. People go, well, what do you think? He's so strong and he's so built, and he's got quickness, and our answer would be, but he doesn't really understand the conceptual side of the game. He gets pushed back 3 to 5 yards on so many plays. He doesn't know how to take a side, and he's someone who doesn't really even know how to use his hands consistently in a way to have a plan beyond me bull rush, man in front of me, me move the piano. I mean, that's kind of all that we're really seeing at this stage.
And the scary thing about that guy is because if that's the way he plays and he can't find more dynamic ways to utilize his skills, he will crash and burn in the NFL. He will. It's a guarantee that he will crash, because that just cannot hold up. Being that robotic, that predictable, and that undersized at the NFL level, you have to have more to your arsenal, or you just get swallowed. He will get swallowed completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's all predicated on whether or not he has that ability to grow as an overall football player, which is the big question. And that's the question that you're talking about, that we still have more questions than answers about. So
that's what's nagging at me. That was exactly what was nagging at me. Is I'm thinking about it in the interview, like, what would I ask this guy? What would I want to do working? What do I want to see if he was working out? I would probably take some of these plays, and I would ask him to describe for me what Alabama was doing, what they were coached on, what they're supposed to do in those situations. What has he learned since from, certain keys or things he should read now that he's seen himself in hindsight? What are some things that he should have done? I would have wanted to know some of that. I would want to know whether, I would want to talk to his coaches first and some of his teammates and see about whether or not how they were coached on the defensive line, and then ask him questions to see if his answers were consistent with his teammates about how he was coached, and whether or not he was like saying, oh no, we were never shown this, we were never shown that, and then have two other guys going, oh yeah, they harped on this every week, all the time. And it was in a way where I wasn't asking those guys, was Robert asleep in these meetings? Or was or was he goofing off? Was he on his phone, or was he doing stuff? Because I wouldn't want to put him on the spot, but I would ask his teammates, so what's going on here? What were you taught? What would they do? How they do it? And they'd tell me, the process, and then I'd ask him, and if he tells me it's a complete 180 from that process, I go, this guy's not serious yet. He's serious about making money right now in this room with me, but he's not serious about his craft. And that would be a big concern. I'd want to work him out, and I'd want to see how fluid he is in all these drills, but then I'd want to do some drills where he'd have to do some diagnosis, and he'd have to do some things that are not just like, rote, I've done this drill 8 million times type of stuff, things where he actually has to think a little bit or react a little bit in ways that if he doesn't look fluid and he continues to do some of that stuff, even after he says he's learned some things, I'd pass. And I think those are the things that I would try to set up for him on a full day visit.
That would be enlightening. I think that you would get a lot more understanding of what his potential is in that regard, and the things that we're questioning. I like that. Those are good things. Overall, like, without having that information and where we stand now, he's too risky. He's just too risky of a player to take a chance on. And I don't know. I've always been a guy who sees coaching turning players into great players. I see that as I'm on the low end of that. And I think where it matters the most is in schemes. Like, I could see where a coach like Chip Kelly can scheme a guy into taking advantage of what the scheme presents. But in terms of, like, I'm going to teach you how to be a great football player, that gets to a point where you either have it or you don't. And I don't know where he is on that. And it's hard to ever say where anyone is on that to a degree, or where it all stops for them. But that risk with Robert is way too great for anything. Yeah, 5th round, maybe start thinking about him. But if this guy's a 2nd round draft pick, and I'm not going to be surprised if he is. I don't like it. Don't like it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to be the great physical skill, and we can teach him, and we're both going to be looking at each other going, well, how far did that teaching get anybody? I mean, there's always the exception, but The rule tends to be that this guy, again, he might be tag teaming with Sean Oakman in 5 years. And they might be the WWF world champions, if they really apply themselves in the ring and they have the toughness to do it. They both definitely can hit, So, I mean, I hate to be disparaging like that, but I mean, again, it's about football is a tough business. It's a very competitive one, and you can be a great athlete and not have what's going on, upstairs for the game. You can be a smart guy, but not have what's going on upstairs, specifically for football, and have that combination of, that kind of intelligence for the game and that kind of feel and savvy. And so far, I mean, that's the question marks. So,
and none of those qualities were shining on tape for either of these prospects tonight. Yeah. And let me just say one thing about the concept of team building and talent evaluation in general. It's better to be cautious about a player and miss on him, and he turns out to be great. But the guys you actually pick, the guys you actually draft, you want to hit those as consistently as possible. And so if you miss a guy that you pick, that actually hurts you more than missing a guy that you stayed away from.
I think that's an absolutely terrific point. And you have to, I mean, I think there are more examples of playoff teams with a lot of solid players and not not one single superstar on a certain unit than there are teams that have a bunch of guys who are going to be out of the league in next year, but one superstar holding down the fort. You kind of have to have players that are spread across the line who are competent, at least competent. So I'm kind of there with you. Well, this was a great show. I mean, this was really a lot of fun, and Ryan and I are certainly going to do, a lot more of these down the line. I may split this up a little bit. So if if you're seeing the end of this, where in the beginning where we're talking about team building and what we would do with players, I'm starting to think I might have that as a clip onto itself at some point. But for Ryan Riddle, I'm Matt Waldman. Thanks again for tuning in the RSP Film Room, and we'll see you again next week.